The price of silence. The third night after old Ravenhold began like the second, with Edrick seated on cold stone in the archives, counting breaths while the Devourer raged. 1, 2, 3. The entity had learned to time its attacks now, waiting until Edrick reached 17 or 23, before striking with memories that weren't his, cities that burned before humanity learned to write, the taste of worlds devoured, the exquisite agony of being bound and divided. Each vision came wrapped in certainty. This is what you are now. This is what you will become. 4, 5, 6. Better, Shamaz said from across the small chamber. The old scholar sat with his own back against the wall, a leather-bound volume open across his lap. You held the count through that last assault. The Devourer is learning that these moments belong to you alone. Edrick opened his eyes. The green light in his chest pulsed with frustrated fury, casting shadows that moved wrong across the ancient stones. It's getting louder, not stronger, louder, like it's trying to drown out my thoughts with volume instead of force. A change in tactics. Shamaz made a note in the margin of his text, which means the previous approach was failing. Progress, Your Majesty. Progress. Edrick tasted the word and found it bitter. 3 days of counting breaths and building mental walls. 3 days of Rose testing him with blade and word. 3 days of Illyria teaching him to recognize which thoughts were his and which were carefully planted suggestions. 3 days, and the 200 cultists still waited outside the gates with the patience of stone. 2,000 more waited at strongholds across the kingdom. They know, the Devourer whispered. They know you cannot hold me forever. They have faith, little king. More faith than your own people, who watch you with fear in their eyes and hands on their weapons. The fourth lesson, Shamaz said, closing his book. Are you ready? Edrick wanted to say no. Wanted to say he needed more time to master the first 3 lessons. More time before adding another weight to the balance. But time was the one thing he had too much of. Centuries or millennia stretching ahead while everyone he loved grew old and died. I'm ready. Shamaz stood, joints creaking, and moved to a small table where several objects waited. A candle, a bowl of water, a smooth river stone, and a leather cord with 7 knots tied along its length. The ancient Urith called this practice Katheris, the art of anchoring. You have learned to create space in your mind that the Devourer cannot fill. Now you must learn to tie that space to the physical world. He picked up the candle and lit it from one of the archive's lamps. The flame cast warm light across his weathered face. Watch the flame, not with your eyes, but with the part of you that counts breaths. Let it become the center of your awareness. Edrick focused on the small flame. 1, 2, 3. Each breath synchronized with the flicker and sway. Pointless, the Devourer said. These parlor tricks will not save you. 4, 5, 6. When the Devourer speaks, Shamaz continued, you will look at this flame and remember this moment, this room, this breath. You will tie your consciousness to something real and present, something that exists outside the war in your mind. 7, 8, 9. The technique made sense intellectually, but putting it into practice felt like trying to hold water in his bare hands. The Devourer's voice filled his skull, and the flame seemed very far away, very small against the vast darkness that pressed from within. Your Majesty, Rose's voice came from the doorway. Commander Aldwin requests your presence. It's urgent. Edrick's concentration shattered. The Devourer surged forward with triumph, and for a moment the green light flared so bright that Rose's hand went to her sword hilt. Breathe, Shamaz said sharply. The flame, Edrick. Find the flame. 1, 2, 3. The candle. The warm light. This room. This moment. 4, 5, 6. The green light dimmed. Rose's hand relaxed, though her eyes remained wary. Better, Shamaz said quietly. You found your anchor even in disruption. That is the lesson. Not perfection in stillness, but recovery in chaos. Edrick stood slowly, his legs stiff from hours of sitting. What does Aldwin need? Rose's expression was grim. The cultists. Something's changed. They found Commander Aldwin on the eastern battlements, staring down at the courtyard where the 200 cultists had maintained their vigil for 3 days. Except now, they weren't standing in silent rows. They were kneeling, all 200 of them, foreheads pressed to the ground, arms spread wide in a posture of absolute supplication. And they were speaking, not shouting, but murmuring in perfect unison, a sound like wind through dead leaves. When did this start? Edrick asked. Aldwyn didn't take her eyes off the scene below. An hour ago. All at once, as if someone gave a signal we couldn't see. They've been chanting the same phrase over and over. She paused. Shamaz translated it. The old scholar had followed them up to the battlements. His face was pale. It's old Thornhaven. Very old. They're saying, we wait for the awakening. We wait for the throne. We wait for the king who devours. Yes, the devourer purred. They understand what you refuse to accept. I am not your prisoner, little king. You are my vessel, my throne. And when you finally break, and you will break, I will rise from your flesh and reclaim what was stolen from me 3,000 years ago. Edrick's hand went to his chest, where the green light pulsed in time with his heartbeat. The candle. He needed to think of the candle, the flame, the moment of stillness in the archives. But the chanting below made it impossible to focus. 200 voices speaking as one, calling for his transformation, his surrender, his death and rebirth as something else. Your Majesty, Aldwyn said carefully, there's more. Scouts report that the cultists at other strongholds have done the same. All of them, at the same hour, kneeling, chanting, as if they received word of something we don't know about. What could they know that we don't? Rose asked. The fragments are contained. The devourer is bound. What are they waiting for? Aluria emerged from the stairwell, slightly out of breath. She must have run from wherever she'd been studying. I found something in the Urith texts, something Elder Ashara marked as critical but didn't explain fully. She held up a scroll, its edges brittle with age. The binding isn't static, it changes over time, adapting to the vessel's consciousness. And there are phases. Phases? Edrick heard his own voice as if from a great distance. The first phase is resistance. The vessel fights to keep the entity contained. The second phase is adaptation. The vessel and entity begin to understand each other, to map each other's boundaries. Aluria's dark eyes met his. We're in the second phase now. The devourer is learning you, and you're learning it. The meditation, the counting, the anchoring, these are all tools for the second phase. And the third phase? Rose asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Aluria looked down at the kneeling cultists. Integration, where the boundaries between vessel and entity begin to blur, where the question of who is imprisoning whom becomes unclear. She is wiser than the old man, the devourer said. She understands that you cannot hold me separate forever. Eventually, we will become one. The only question is whether you will retain any fragment of yourself when that happens, or whether I will consume you entirely. The candle, the flame, the moment of stillness. But Edrick couldn't find it. The chanting below, the weight of Aluria's words, the certainty in the devourer's voice, it all pressed down like a physical force. How long? He managed. How long until the third phase begins? Aluria hesitated. The text isn't clear. It depends on the strength of the vessel, the power of the entity, and the nature of the binding. For King Edrick, who carried only one fragment, the text suggests it took decades, but you carry all 5 fragments and the sealing blade. The pressure is exponentially greater. Months? Rose asked. Weeks? The text says the third phase begins when the vessel stops fighting and starts negotiating, when they begin to see the entity not as an enemy to be contained, but as a force to be managed. Aluria's voice dropped. When they start to wonder if cooperation might be easier than constant war. Months, the devourer confirmed. Perhaps weeks, perhaps days. Every time you count your breaths, every time you build your walls, you grow tired. And I never tire, little king. I have existed since before your species learned to make fire. I can wait. Edrick turned away from the battlements, unable to watch the kneeling cultists any longer. His legs felt weak, his chest tight. The green light pulsed faster, responding to his distress. I need to go back to the archives, he said. I need to practice the 4th lesson. You need to rest, Rose interrupted. You've been awake for 2 days straight. The devourer wants you exhausted, because exhausted people make mistakes. I can't rest with that sound. Edrick gestured toward the courtyard. I can't close my eyes and not see what they're waiting for. Shamaz stepped forward. Then we will give you silence. Aluria, do the Urith texts mention any way to block sound without blocking awareness? There's a technique, she said slowly. A way of filtering what reaches your consciousness. but it's advanced, and it requires trust. Trust in what? In us. You would have to lower your mental barriers enough to let us help you build new ones, specific ones that filter out the chanting, but leave everything else intact. Foolish, the Devourer said. Lower your barriers, and I will flood through. I will show them what their king truly is. But Edrick looked at Rose, at Shamaz, at Aluria, at Commander Aldwin standing ready with her hand near her sword. He thought of the trust exercise in the training yard, of Rose's blade stopping a hair's breadth from his throat because she knew him well enough to judge the distance perfectly. All right, he said. Show me. They returned to the archives, and this time Aluria took the lead. She had Edrick sit in the center of the room while she, Shamaz, and Rose positioned themselves around him in a triangle. The candle burned between them. Close your eyes, Aluria instructed. Find your counting space. Build your walls as you've been taught. 1, 2, 3, the familiar rhythm, the mental space that was his alone. 4, 5, 6. Now, Aluria said softly, imagine a door in those walls. Just one door, and imagine that Rose stands on the other side. Edrick pictured it, the walls he'd built through 3 days of practice, solid and strong. And in one wall, a door, Rose on the other side, waiting. Open the door, Aluria said. Just a crack, just enough to let her in. The Devourer surged forward immediately, trying to force its way through the opening. But Rose was faster. Edrick felt her presence. Not invasive, not threatening, but steady and familiar. She slipped through the crack and stood beside him in the mental space he'd created. Impossible, the Devourer hissed. Now, Shamaz, Aluria continued. Another door, another opening. It was easier the second time. Shamaz entered the space with the care of a scholar handling ancient texts, examining the walls Edrick had built with approval. And me, Aluria said, the third door. When all three of them stood in the mental space with him, Edrick understood what Aluria had meant by trust. He had lowered his barriers, made himself vulnerable, and they had not betrayed that vulnerability. They stood with him, not against him. The chanting, Aluria said. Can you hear it? Edrick could. Even here, in this space, the cultists' voices reached him. We wait for the awakening. We wait for the throne. We wait for the king who devours. Now watch, Aluria said. We're going to build a filter. Not a wall. Walls keep everything out. A filter lets through what you need and blocks what you don't. The three of them worked together, their combined consciousness shaping something new in Edrick's mental space. It felt like weaving, like braiding 3 cords into something stronger than any single strand. The filter took shape. A barrier that recognized the specific rhythm and tone of the cultist chanting and deflected it, while leaving everything else untouched. When they finished, the silence was profound. Edrick could still hear his own breathing, the crackling of the candle, the distant sounds of the castle, but the chanting was gone, blocked by the filter his friends had helped him build. Open your eyes, Rose said. He did. The three of them sat around him, exhausted but smiling slightly. The fourth lesson, Shamaz said. You are not alone, and together we can build defenses you could never build alone. Temporary, the Devourer said, but its voice was quieter now, uncertain. This changes nothing, but it did change something. Edrick could feel the difference. The weight was still there, the constant pressure of the entity testing his prison, but the filter held, and the silence gave him room to breathe. Thank you, he said. Sleep, Rose ordered. Real sleep, for at least a few hours. We'll stand watch. Edrick wanted to argue, but exhaustion crashed over him like a wave. 2 days without rest. 3 days of constant mental warfare. His body was demanding payment. He lay down on the cold stone floor of the archives, using his rolled cloak as a pillow. Rose sat nearby, her sword across her lap. Shamaz returned to his texts. Aluria positioned herself by the door. As Edrick's eyes closed, he heard the Devourer's whisper one last time. Sleep, little king. Dream. And when you wake, we will see how long your precious filter holds. But for now, there was silence. And in that silence, Edrick found something he hadn't felt since old Ravenhold. Hope. He slept, and dreamed of a candle burning in the dark, its flame small but steady, refusing to go out.
Thanks for watching our stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more epic adventures. Thanks for watching our stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more epic adventures.